We are going to open the hearing on Assembly Bill 329. Mr. Assemblyman Gokachia. I know you've been back there for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Assemblyman Gokachia, representing Assembly District 35, which is all part of 8 counties across central Nevada. Sometimes you have a simple little bill that takes a life of its own, and this is one of those. You know, it's only the front page, and it has definitely got life. So I just want to make a couple of clarifications as we start. There's nothing in this bill that changes where a horse or a burro drank last week, where he drank this morning, or where he'll drink next week. The misconception seems to be that if you appropriate water, you would own it. And, you know, water belongs to the people of the state of Nevada. You only appropriate the right to use it. And you don't have the ability to take it home with you. And on public lands, you can't deny access to it. So I just want to clarify that before we started. AB 329 is intended to address one issue and only one issue. And that is the fact that we've had applications made by federal agencies that used Nevada's wildlife as a beneficial use. This bill is intended to establish that Nevada has a primacy over its wildlife and its water resources. I can't use your cow, Senator Rhodes, to establish a beneficial use. I can't use Senator Lee's dog to establish a beneficial use. And in this case, what is happening, the federal agencies are using Nevada's wildlife to establish beneficial use for wildlife and wild horses and burros. This bill just clarifies that wild horses and burros are under jurisdiction of the federal government. That came in 1971 with the passage of the Wild Horse and Burro Act. There is the state of Nevada has no jurisdiction over wild horses and burros, and the federal agencies have no jurisdiction over Nevada's water. I think that is really, I hope as these people come forward, I think most of you people on the committee understand that the sources that wild horses and burros are using today are probably in most cases appropriate. The state engineer I know is here this afternoon to testify, and I'm sure he can verify that. The bottom line is, those horses are drinking water today, they did last month, and they will next month. And they are probably drinking from appropriated sources. This bill does nothing to change that. The bottom line is, this only clarifies that the federal agencies cannot use Nevada's wildlife to prove beneficial use on Nevada's water. Thank you. Any questions?
I'm sure there'll be a ton later. But any questions for the sponsor right now? Okay. All right. You certainly know how to pack a house.
Well, I apologize. I know better. You don't mix horses and water in the state of Nevada. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jason King, State Engineer for the Division of Water Resources. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. My prepared testimony is very brief, and I'll read that, and then I'm happy to answer obviously any questions you may have. Our office is neutral on the bill. The issue is really one of state policy, and it is our understanding that if the bill were to pass, it would apply prospectively and therefore wouldn't affect any existing wildlife permits for wild horses or burros that are in existence. I'm not trying to throw a fly into the ointment. I brought up this proposed amendment on the other side. If this bill is to move forward, right now this language is in NRS 532, and we would propose to move it to NRS 533. And that is it, my prepared testimony, so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Why don't we hear a little more, and then that wasn't too helpful, so, all right. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Doug Musselman. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Nevada Farm Bureau. We are here today to speak in support of AB 329. This bill clarifies that the property right of a water right should not be given to an entity for a beneficial use which is for something else. In spite of the controversy and allegations regarding this legislative proposal, there is no intent and no wording in this bill to prevent wild horses or burros from drinking water. Wildlife belong to the people of the state of Nevada and are managed by the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Wild horses and burros are identified within federal statutes and management authority granted to federal land management agencies. Wild horses are not qualified to be identified as wildlife, and wildlife are not animals under the authority of federal agencies. From the list of water rights we've received from the state engineer for wildlife and wild horses and burros which have been granted to federal agencies, we would note the following points. The water rights granted specifically to wild horses and burros cover roughly 1,100 animals, an extremely tiny fraction of the total number of horses and burros in the state. This reality demonstrates our contention that horses are drinking water today without water rights, and that won't change with passage of a law which says that we will not establish a water right for the federal government to claim for animals which aren't the animals being used for the reason for the water being put to use. Prior to the first water rights granted to wild horses and burros in 1980, horses and burros were drinking water. In spite of the rights granted not covering the number of horses drinking the water, horses are still drinking water. With passage of this bill and requiring water rights for wildlife to be granted to wildlife and not other species, wild horses and burros will be able to continue to drink water. Nevada's authority over granting water rights, a property right, for specified beneficial uses and having those rights applied to the uses for which they are issued is what our whole message is about in this bill. We urge your passage of AB 329 and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Rich Haskins, Deputy Director of the Department of Wildlife, and I'm here today to provide technical expertise on AB 329 on behalf of the Department. We are officially neutral on this. A couple of points here. The Department of Wildlife has never considered wild horses as wildlife throughout the history of wildlife management, legislative history. Additionally, the Wildlife Society, the premier professional scientific and scholarly association in the country on wildlife biology, defines wildlife as living organisms that are not humans, domesticated animals, or plants. Wild animals' ancestors have never been domesticated, modified by selective breeding, whereas feral animal ancestors were once domesticated but are now free-ranging in the absence of human care. The wild horses in America are classified by the Wildlife Society as feral and not a part of the natural ecosystem. The Free Roaming and Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971 provides protection for wild horses and burros and requires management for wild horses under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management. It does not define them as wildlife. It should be noted, however, no matter what state laws passed or not passed, wild horses are federally protected under the Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971. If you have any questions for me,
Okay, any questions, committee?
Chairman Menendo, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wonder if it would be useful for me to describe what the world of water rights would look like for wild horses if this bill were to pass. I don't know if that's something you'd like to hear about or you want to hear more.
That would be great.